safe streets, vibrant neighborhoods, successful business and commerce. These are things that make a healthy community. We are a diverse community, rural, suburban, urban, a multitude of languages and ethnicities, ages and experiences. We are a collaborative community. Public-private partnerships make us a model community that others want to follow. It is what makes us unique. It is what makes us strong. The employees of Kent County reflect our diversity and seek to serve our communities.
People in this county, in this area, we wrap our arms around each other. We come together to collaborate, to solve problems. We're all working for the good of the whole. And I think that's wonderful. And you can see it. You can see it as you drive around Kent County.
Our impact starts the day a baby is born and a birth certificate is issued, to protecting children from deadly diseases through vaccination, to the public safety and justice provided by law enforcement and the courts, to offering veteran services and caring for the elderly. Every day we work to keep our communities robust.
I think if you are somebody who is interested in serving your community, in building a strong knowledge base and a good group of people to work with, then the county is one of your best employment opportunities out there. It's been completely rewarding in every way I could possibly explain for 26 years, and I feel like I grow every single day still today.
Leading these dedicated employees, our 19-member Board of Commissioners and our County Administrator Controller, along with our elected officials and appointed department directors, placing emphasis on civic involvement, quality housing, vibrant neighborhoods, and strong, solid infrastructure to allow businesses to thrive. Professional, dedicated, collaborative, and innovative.
Behind the scenes, collaboration between foundations, charitable organizations, nonprofits, for-profit businesses, public sector demonstrated through the county, the city of Grand Rapids, the townships, all the cities and the villages in our area. If we don't come together, then we will not have the strength that we have today, and I only hope to build upon that.
Our aim is to make our communities the best they can be. We are involved in exciting development projects, sustainable recycling programs, and creative progressive prevention programming. We partner with elected officials, impacting policy ideas that become great achievements. We seek opportunities to reach out into the community and offer our services to help our residents make Kent County thrive.
Our relationship is solid, both from a staff standpoint at the county level as well as the Board of Commissioners. And they understand what we do and the benefits that we can do for the community, and vice versa. We couldn't do what we do without the help of Kent County.
While most of us are busy running our lives, Kent County's elected officials, administrator controller, and over 1,600 employees are serving the communities where we live our lives, so we can all have a place we are proud to call home. Kent County, its life well run.
Good morning. It is 8:32. We gave this a little bit of extra time to get our TV feed set up, so it is time for the Legislative and Human Resource Committee of the Board of Commissioners. And I will call it to order, and we will start with public comment. If anyone wishes to address the committee, you may do so. If you will stand at the podium, identify yourself, and you have up to 3 minutes to address items that are on the agenda.
Good morning. My name is Douglas Edward Scheidel. I am the survivor of a catastrophic accident in Kent County, a motor vehicle pedestrian. The officer that responded on scene has me in a different location than the fire department who secured the scene. The woman that hit me was allowed to flee the scene with no charges based on the officer's false testimony, even though he collected my ID from Yorkland and places me in the intersection in Elpenhorn. He claims it was a minor accident. The ambulance, Life Ambulance, administered 2 50-milligram doses of fentanyl, which is a class 1 narcotic, proving that it's not a minor accident. They refused to investigate. It went through Kent Court, 63rd District Court on June 24th of 2012. the Sergeant Corey Luce, who is in charge of the Kent County's victim, or the crash investigative unit, was never notified until October of 2012, when I brought it to his attention. Sergeant Corey Luce claims there's no evidence. The evidence is what the officer collected himself. News 8 did an article on the accident, clearly stating it was a head-on. She parked on my back tire, totaling the vehicle through the state of Michigan. Again, how is it minor? And the Sheriff's Department refuses to even listen to me or look at the evidence that they themselves has collected. These are crimes against the Constitution. They cannot and should not be tolerated in this county or in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, we'll move to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes, May 28, 2019. Is there a motion to approve? Is moved and supported. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is approved. The next item is performance measurement review from our sheriff, Sheriff Michelle Joy Young. Good morning. I believe a PowerPoint was distributed before the meeting.
I promise I will not take an hour and a half this morning. We'll go with that, and I can stay under that pretty safely.
Yeah, I will commit that that's true too.
Yes. All right, so thank you for having me up here this morning. I am gonna go pretty quickly through the first several slides and just kind of talk about some overview stuff, because I do want to focus a little bit on the actual performance measures as we get to it, and I gotta figure out how to click through this. There we go. All right, so just some objectives. I'm going to show alignment with the board priorities, our key performance matrix, significant budget issues, significant accomplishments, key collaborations, and then a look ahead into the next, hopefully, several years. So your priority alignment are stable revenues, efficient use of resources, safe community, citizen participation, proactive and innovative government, and high quality of life. And so I'm going to explain how we're pushing into all of your priority alignment into with the work we're doing. So first, stable revenues. Obviously, having stable revenues and resources that we can count on to do our work is really, really crucial to all government, but especially the Sheriff's Office. And we rely pretty heavily on many of the partnerships that we've worked on so hard over the last several years. I think you can remember we have a robust township and city patrol relationship where the townships or the cities are paying for extra resources to patrol their area to augment the response that we pay for out of general fund. We have many partnerships for dispatch and 911 call taking. We currently contract with every city and township within the county except for the city of Grand Rapids. And then we work in partnership with them to provide backup for each other for 911 call taking and dispatch services. We have extensive inmate work programs and programming for the inmates within the correctional facility. Frankly, that's 100% done with our partnerships and collaborations. It's oversought. We have oversight at the Sheriff's Office, but the programs themselves are actually accomplished through partnerships. Kent County area narcotics enforcement and vice forfeiture funds, those are all done through a collaboration through all the departments within Kent County. And we work together to make sure that we're all protected. Many of these crimes, they don't happen in just one township. They're happening over 1, 2, 5, 10 communities in our county at the same time. And so that's why it's so important to work in collaboration. Mental health services for incarcerated inmates. They are not able to be assisted in the very short time that we have them incarcerated in a way that stabilizes them when they're out in the community. So we work very closely with Network 180 to align the services that are in the correctional facility with those services that they either have been receiving in the past or can receive in the future in the outside community. And this helps stabilize that population and the mental health of every individual who's incarcerated. We have a very robust partnership with Network 180, and it is moving forward all the time. Community event security and traffic management. These are partnerships with people who are putting on different events in our community to bring people to the city centers or to bring people out to raise money for certain events or to just have a good time. We partner with those entities so that we can provide safety and security as our citizens are enjoying the community. Community police and school resource officer programs are all partnerships. We contract with different entities to have very specific types of police work done in the particular entity that they're contracting for. School resource officer, for example, works very closely with that school district to make sure that the at-risk population from that school district is followed up with and monitored, and that cases that get reported to the school are resolved and resolved in a positive way so that they don't continue to fester and become bigger issues and sometimes school violence. Specialized enforcement of sexual crimes against child victims. We have a very important relationship with the Child Advocacy Center where officers are in a forensically correct environment for children, and they're partnered with counseling so that people can work through the ramifications of a sexual assault. At the same time, we're working through the case and the actual criminal proceedings. So it works much, much better than bringing a young person down to the sheriff's office and putting them in a cold, stark room and having a police officer talk to them and interview them in that setting. We have a very robust canine and mounted unit program. Both of them are completely funded by citizen contributions to these programs, and they're used extensively throughout the county for law enforcement purposes, but then also opportunities to bring people out and understand more about the sheriff's department and the county in general. We work really hard to use our resources that you give us effectively, and again, I've already talked about all these partnerships that we have, but those partnerships are the most effective way that we can perform our responsibilities, and we can help other entities perform their responsibilities in a collaborative way. Some examples are we work closely with the FBI or the DEA, Department of Homeland Security and Michigan State Police for drug investigations, computer crime investigations. I'm going to side note on that. Computer crimes, very, very difficult for any entity. This is something that across the nation, law enforcement entities are struggling with. So in this area, we've worked very closely with these collaborative teams so that every entity has a place to go with that difficult computer evidence that needs to be gone through and indexed and prepared for court. We have a member on the FBI web check team, which is a group that's dedicated to criminal sexual predators online. We work in collaboration with them, and it works better for us to do that because we don't have the resources to literally police the entire web for somebody who might be of origin here in Kent County. So these teams help us leverage our resources, but it also leverages the resources of our partners. So it's a good collaboration, and we have great outcomes from it. We contract with Lighthouse Academy to provide education within the correctional facility. Lighthouse Academy is our first opportunity in many, many years to actually provide high school diplomas, graduation from high school, not GED. They also provide GED, but actual diplomas. We've had 18 diplomas issued to inmates in the correctional facility since we've partnered with Lighthouse. And now that partnership's expanding so that if an inmate is going to classes while they're in the facility, Lighthouse gives them resources and a facility to go to once they become released to finish if they have just a few classes to go and they want to continue. And we've had one young man who's done that on the outside even. So it's great programs. We provide for a safe community. As you're traversing the county of Kent and working and living and thriving in this community, we provide 24-hour road patrol so that you can do that safely as you're traversing the county. We run a safe and secure correctional facility. We have emergency communications dispatch center, and I'll go into specific details of each of these as we get into our performance measures. We have a tactical response team that we provide, not just to our calls, the Kent County Sheriff's Office calls, but any entity, any like Kentwood or perhaps Wyoming or Walker who might have a need for a tactical response. We work in conjunction with them to provide that. We've talked about our school resource officer program. It's now the most robust school resource officer program in the county. Community policing unit that works very, very hard to set up community outreach programming so that our relationship that's necessary to do proper law enforcement is growing in our community as opposed to retracting in our community. We have a K-9 program, and that K-9 program provides K-9s for patrol, narcotics, arson. We have K-9s in the correctional facility that help us detect contraband coming in, which is really, really important in the opioid epidemic. And we have a comfort dog that is assigned to the child advocacy center that we talked about for child sexual predators. We have a mounted unit that works very, very closely with the city and some other entities within the county. That mounted unit does downtown patrol quite often, particularly on the Friday, Saturday evenings when they have a large group of people downtown, or maybe for a festival or events, because the mounted unit helps us work quite well with crowds who are cooperative but just need to be moving in a certain direction. And it also allows the officers to have a great vantage point so that they can see what's going on. We do that in a partnership with GRPD. GRPD also supplies officers to work on our mounted unit, and we supply officers to work in their areas for the mounted unit. 416 and traffic enforcement and accident reconstruction investigative team. We provide that for the entire county. We have a Marine Patrol. I don't know if you're familiar with the foundational authority of the Sheriff's Office, but constitutionally, we have to recover drowned bodies. So we virtually have to provide a Marine Patrol unit. But beyond what we're required to do, which is to have that dive team, we also patrol all the lakes in Kent County for safety issues. Make sure you have your life jackets, make sure that there's no safety violations happening, and we do enforce, like such as OWI or drug boating laws also on the waterways. And we have a Parks Police unit that works to supply full-time presence in Millennial Park during summer months, but then also part-time enforcement in all of our county parks as needed. Citizen participation is really, really important for all of us, but especially the Sheriff's Office, because we have to be responsive to what the community needs and wants. And we can't do that without hearing from the citizens, without having people be able to talk to us. So we've got a couple of initiatives that we think really work towards that. We have a robust media and social media campaign to communicate issues to the public. We work very hard to make sure that we're responsive when we're getting media requests and that we fully answer them, and we do it in a way that is helpful to the requester. We have complete transparency with requests for information. We work very hard to make sure that information that we can release is released and it's done in a timely way. We do that on the scene of crimes. I'm sure you've seen us do that, but we also do it after the fact, where we allow for people to come in and get information. We have a Citizens Police Academy for those citizens who are interested in an in-depth look at the Sheriff's Office. This is a 13-week program. It's 13 weeks, 2 hours or 3 hours some nights, once a week for a couple different months. We've had 850 graduates from this program, and to be frank about it, once somebody has graduated from this program, they become some of our biggest supporters. We have them come back as volunteers, donors sometimes for some of our K-9 or mounted unit programs, because they learn a lot about the Sheriff's Department and they learn a lot about the heart of the people who work at the Sheriff's Department and what they're trying to do every day. We collaborate and participate with Silent Observer. Silent Observer is a very important program to our community because it allows people to reach out and tell us something that's going to make their community safer, even if they don't feel it's in their best interest to go on record. We have volunteer programs. So I don't have an exact count of how many volunteers currently work for the Sheriff's Department because some of them are really quite occasional. But the last time we did count, it was over 700 people who volunteer at the Sheriff's Department in an active status. That is more than my actual staff. So I think that's a pretty incredible number. Student and parent safety programs such as computer safety and awareness. This is often done through our school resource program, and it gives us an opportunity to have that officer provide information in a positive, helpful way, because it helps create relationships with those parents and with those students so that they know there's a safe place to reach out and ask a question if they have something going on. We do one of the largest national night out programs in the entire state, down in the south area of our county. We actually do it all over the county, but the south one is the largest one. And that gives us an opportunity to basically have a carnival kind of setting for the neighborhoods to come out, see the sheriff's office, meet some of our staff, meet some of our volunteers, and just have a good night and enjoy themselves. And there's an app for that. We've just launched our sheriff's app this year. We've talked to you about it, but it is intended to be a one-stop location for people to get information that they need often from the Sheriff's Department without having to call or maybe go to the full website and try to figure out where to find it. All of this is aimed at helping citizens become more knowledgeable about what the Sheriff's Department does and have an opportunity to help us understand what their needs are better. Proactive and innovative government is one of your priorities. It's also one of mine. Through extensive contracts, which we've talked about, we work diligently to reduce crime in our county. We work very hard to resolve crimes that get reported and also to be present in communities in a time of need when crimes are happening. Correctional Facility, powerful programs we've talked about, but I just want to name a couple of these programs. Sober Living, Life Skills Pod, or affectionately known as the God Pod. We have AA and NA, and we are in the middle of a 3-tier process to launch MAT programming for opioid addicted inmates who come in to the correctional facility. At this point, last year our pilot was to bring those who were part of the court program, drug court program, and allow them to continue that program when they were incarcerated. This year we've pushed forward so that those people who have a program outside, beyond the court program, and are already in treatment can continue that treatment when they come into the correctional facility. And our next phase, and in combination with Network 180, we're trying to allow people to start a program when they're incarcerated. It's, and a little bit more on that because I don't have an additional slide on that. It's a very difficult thing to do in a correctional facility that is for pretrial people because we don't know how long we're going to have them. Very often we don't know how long they'll be incarcerated. So the treatment part of that, not just the drug part of it, the treatment part of it can take a while to get up and running and then get a person to a point where they're ready to begin a program. But we are working very diligently on it, and I will be happy to come back and report to you guys as we make more progress with it. But we have several people today that are being treated as part of this MAT program. Our focus with inmate programming is to reduce criminal activity because everybody in our entire community wins when we've reduced criminal activity. Now, we can do that by helping the inmates that come into our correctional facility get to a better place in life and get to a better decision-making matrix for themselves. And every inmate who comes into our correctional facility who's sentenced and wants to participate in a treatment program of some sort, they have the ability to do that in our correctional facility. Those that are pretrial who are going to be there for a period of time can also be eligible for this inmate programming. But much of the successful programming does have minimum amounts of time that somebody would have to participate for it to be successful. Some of them are 30 days, some of them are 90 days. It just kind of depends on the program that we're working with. So it is difficult when somebody, I think our average stay is about 11 days. So across all inmates, about 11 days. So obviously you can see not every person can participate in a program for 11 days, but what we can do, we are doing with these programs, and I intend on moving those forward as we move over the next several years, and we're exploring some options to include tethering that we might be able to use to help give access to even more inmates in a pretrial status to some of our programming. Again, our biggest priority is to provide a high quality of life for people who live and work and play in Kent County. And I think we do that by providing a fabric of safety for people who come here. It's the 911 system that we are facilitating. It's also the security at special events and in normal venues that people would be. We also provide it in their communities where they drive through or live. Our jail is the largest mental health service location in the county. About 50% of our inmates that come into the facility are on psychotropic drugs, which means that there's some kind of mental health issue. 10% of them are deemed seriously mentally impaired. I want to get a little bit into our performance matrix and then hopefully leave you lots of time for questions afterwards. We'll talk a little bit about our correctional facility. This is a lot of what we do. It's about 60% of the sheriff's office budget will go to the correctional facility. So one of the most important things in a correctional facility is to have a safe, orderly environment where people can relax and trust that they're going to be safe and that they're going to be provided for. It's very important to almost every program that we have. One of the things that we use to indicate this is the Sanitation Score. This is compiled by actually doing inspections throughout the correctional facility on a regular rotation. So we will grab a group of people together, we will go through each area, and if your area is being inspected today, you'll get a rating, 1 through 10 rating in each of those areas. And if there's something noted that isn't sufficient, perhaps the floor is not clean enough, or perhaps the corner of the shower isn't clean, or maybe maintenance has been deferred on something, then you'll get scored down. So at the end of the year, when these scores are compared, we expect to, on average, be at an 8. And we have been for the last several years, and that's no different for 2018. We were at 8.19. And again, these are different every time. It's not the same things that keep getting hit on the inspection. It's just something that gets hit. I want to remind you that largely who are cleaning our correctional facility are inmates. They're trustees that we're monitoring and working around the correctional facility with. So this is inmate labor that's producing the score. So I think it's pretty good. Inmate management. So we're in a behavioral management setting. We have a setting where inmates are out in the day rooms for a large extent. Most people are out in the day room the majority of their day. They have a very strict code of conduct, and for many of them, this is the first time they've had a very strict code of conduct. So it is very normal for inmates to have minor rule violations and to be sanctioned for minor things. I'll give you a minor rule violation of maybe hanging something up on their cell window so that we can't see in. Well, they're told to take it down and they take it down, that's a minor rule infraction. However, a major rule infraction would be something that would jeopardize the safety and security of somebody else in that pod or themselves in that pod. And we try to keep those reduced as much as possible by giving an inmate the appropriate amount of supervision. Maybe they're in a more intense supervised location. If they can't manage their behavior, we maybe try to watch for an outburst that's about ready to happen and quell it before it can. Again, those officers are right in the pod with those inmates so that they can hear. Maybe the voices are getting raised. Maybe they're talking about the card game they just finished in a way that sounds like they're about ready to get into a fight. That officer should be quelling it, taking everybody, maybe tell them to take a few minutes out of the day room. But we try to monitor that successfulness by the number of major rule violations that we record. We expect it to be under 2 per 1,000 jail bed days. And that's calculated by what's your average daily population times 365, right? So it's jail bed days. And this past year, we had less than 2 at 1.97 major violations per jail bed day. It's facility-wide, that's a pretty good number. Corrections management, now we've talked over the last several years about staffing issues related to the sheriff's office specific to the correctional facility. And just to highlight, there is a national corrections officer shortage. It is a significant shortage to the point that many, many correctional facilities are in jeopardy of not being able to continue to operate. So this is an issue that's important for us to track, and important that we're doing everything we can to make sure that our staff is healthy, happy, and wants to remain a correctional officer at the Kent County Sheriff's Office. We are at capacity in terms of positions right now, which is impressive. So just in case you didn't know, I'm telling you, it's impressive. But what we need to do to keep them is to make sure that we're giving them appropriate break times, and we're giving them a proper relief, and that we're not overstressing them beyond what's necessary. So we've started a new performance measure of trying to make sure they get a break outside of their area, which is important. We've just created a break room for them within the correctional facility. We've worked to start get a rotation going. And although our actual is only 20% of the time for 2018, we're making major strides on it in 2019 already. And we are tweaking the recording process because we think we had some underreporting happening in the last year. So stay tuned to that one. It is something we're monitoring. It's not ready for live time yet, but it's coming. Risk avoidance. So we hear a lot nationally about use of force, and it's a factor that we look at very hard at the sheriff's office. Every report of use of force that happens, whether it's in our law enforcement or our correctional facility, is reviewed in detail, documented, and maintained in case there's future requests for that information. So we know when use of force are happening most of the time, because most of the time it's reported. And we try to work as much as possible to reduce those use of forces. We have something in the correctional facility where if on the law enforcement side, not just from the sheriff's office, but from any law enforcement entity, if they've had a use of force incident with somebody in the field during the arrest, they often will call our central control when they're on their way into the correctional facility for assistance in the Sally Port when they come into the facility. And that's just to prevent that officer from having another use of force incident when they get them out of the car, because that's the next riskiest time. So we were called 137 times. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong number. 285 times last year. We were called 285 times last year to come meet arresting agency in this alley port, and only 15 times was it necessary for us to use force to get that person into the correctional facility. Now, it's not because they all of a sudden got happy on their way to jail. It's because we work really hard at de-escalation and working with the person who's in custody to try to talk them through the process in a way that is conducive to safety and security. And my staff is very, very good at this because we work very hard at training them to do so. And it's important to them. They know we're counting it. Talk a little bit now about our law enforcement. So there's two things that really dictate what the sheriff's office does. We have our constitutional responsibilities, right? And that's to operate a correctional facility or a jail, as it's stated. Also recover drowned bodies. Often not talked about are our civil process responsibilities, which are contracted out in Kent County. So that's our constitutional side. But now we also have a legal requirement through law to do law enforcement, MCL 51.762, each sheriff's department shall provide the following services within the county, and I won't read the whole thing, but patrolling and monitoring traffic violations, enforcing criminal laws of the state, violations which are observed or brought to the attention of the sheriff's department while providing patrolling and monitoring required by this subsection, investigating accidents involving motor vehicles and providing emergency assistance to persons near or on the highway. So to that end, we provide law enforcement services. I just talked about use of force. Again, this is tracked very closely on the law enforcement side of the house because I know you are hearing a lot about use of force nationally. I want to talk a little bit about ours. Now, there is an error in the PowerPoint that I think we originally passed out to you, but for 2018, we used force less than 0.27% for all the incidents we responded to for the Sheriff's Department. That's way below the national average. The national average is just under 1% of the time, but ours is a quarter of that. And I'm very proud of that number. Again, it's because we focus on de-escalation in our training. We work with officers to make sure they're communicating and talking about this is what I need you to do instead of just going in and using force. And I just want to talk to you about the correctional facility. It's not technically one of our performance measures, but last year we had 409,000 jail bed days. So out of that 409 jail bed days, we only had use of force 137 times. So so that is 0.12% of the days we had use of force in our correctional facility. These are incredible numbers, and it's because the staff really works hard at maintaining order instead of forcing people to do what we have to do. These are very good numbers. I'm very proud of the staff for that. Oops, I went past one. All right, we've talked a lot over the last several years about response times and our ability to get somewhere to help with a priority 1 call. I'll just kind of talk a little bit about what a priority 1 call is. It is the highest urgency. It's something that is usually a personal safety factor at risk, and it's active. It's going on right now. You have all the different examples of it here, but like an abduction or an assault in progress or home invasion in progress, a CSC in progress, a drowning in progress, a hostage, robbery or suicide in progress, these things that time is absolutely of the essence. Our goal is to meet the national average for response time for these types of incidences, which is 11 minutes. And so this is averaged over the entire county, all of our response areas. And as you can see, we're still above the national average at 12.14 for priority 1 calls, but we are making progress on it. We have come down a full minute on average, and that is due to some of the staffing things we've talked about over the last couple years and some of the things we've implemented. The issue is averages can be deceiving because they don't address each individual area where somebody might have a call for service. We talked a lot about the contracts that we do, that we have contracts for extra patrol in our communities. Well, not every community has extra patrol, and those who don't rely on our general funded patrols to respond, like we're required to, respond to calls for service. So as you can see across, if you could look at your left-hand side, the left-hand side are those communities that contract for service, where we're generally located in the township at the time of the call because we're contracted patrol there. And the right-hand side are those communities where there is no contract for patrol. And I'll just orient you to the graph here. The blue are our actual response times. The orange are the hold times. Those hold times mean I don't have an officer available to send, so nobody's on their way during that hold time. And I will note there is an error under Grattan Township where the hold time exceeds, and that's because people who are not assigned to that area are going to the call even though they're not actually sent to that call yet, but it shouldn't show up that way. So So as you look at the unfunded townships, the townships that, I shouldn't say unfunded, uncontracted townships, those who aren't contracting for extra patrol services, we do have some very, very extended response times still in those communities. The way our township contracts are written, if, let's say, and I'll just use an example of Plainfield Township, if Plainfield Township contracts for service and I have a car in Plainfield Township, and then I get a priority 1 call north of Plainfield Township in one of the upper 8 townships that don't contract, I can send a Plainfield Township car because that's the way our contracts are written. And often, these are the resources that are being sent. So those contracts help everybody, but the drive time that is necessary when you're coming from a heavy congestion area to go maybe 2 townships away, that's what you're seeing on that response time. All right, and the drive times are not getting better. They're getting worse. I'm sure you've noticed as you're driving around the community, it's not easy to go from one end of the town or one end of the county to the other, and I can guarantee you it doesn't get easier with lights and sirens because you really have to pay attention to people when you're driving lights and sirens, and you just can't go flying across the county. There is no good way to do it. So we're seeing the results of that in our response times, and I think it's a factor that has to be addressed. Now, these are priority 2, so these are also very serious incidences, but they typically are more property related than personal injury related, but it's things that are happening now. Again, you're seeing, so they're a little bit more extended for the property related crimes, but there's definitely, so I've got like almost a 36-minute response time going in Spencer Township, which is the farthest corner. So response times in comparison between 2017 and 2018, you can see we're making some improvements, and I would just want to reorient you to some of the changes we made that we are seeing some results. We took those opportunities where we're being contracted to do what we call special events, so that would be like Fifth Third, I'm calling it, it's actually the Amway River Run now, I guess, but you know, the triathlons and the ballpark and those types of events were being paid at the hourly cost to do so. We combined some of those to have full-time deputies so that we could have them on road patrol, and off the roster we're covering those special events. Really is no different to the person contracting for this special event, but for me in operational management we had resources that we could count on during specific times as opposed to surges that I couldn't count on to actually delegate out for patrol. So we are making some progress. We've also worked very hard to make sure that we're keeping our positions full as we are projecting that people will leave the sheriff's office. We're able to hire temporary staff to get up to speed until, you know, that person's able to actually leave. We have somebody ready to go on the roster instead of going short officers for extended period of time. So we're making very good improvements on it, but as you can see, we still have quite a ways to go. This is just a map that shows the priority 1 and 2 response times that exceed 15 minutes. And I know it's really hard to see on here, but if you're interested in a specific area, you can see where those calls are clustering, where we're having problems getting to. And sometimes it's just the sheer number of them. Like I'll highlight a cluster in the southwest part of the county, that's Tanger Outlet. It's a very high call load location for our county. So sometimes there's many waiting at a time because they, Byron contracts for 2 officers during some hours of the day, not the whole day. And so there's times that we're out of resources to send. So that's what that map is showing. Part of what we were able to do with that special event overtime is to add what we call the power shift. And again, this is using data to support decision making in a way that is practical and economic for the sheriff's office. So I'm actually staffing officers around the time of day of week that we have surgical calls. And we added a power shift to be able to accommodate, but during our heaviest staffing period, this is what the distribution of cars look like. So the dark brown are the contracted. We're paid to have those officers in those townships. The county-funded power shift, those are the orange, and those are the cars that are there for a limited portion of the day, but are really helping out during that very heavy call load. And then as you see the gold color, those are what we call district cars. Those are our traditional general funded cars that are there. We're required to have them to back up the township contracts, but we're also required to have cars available to respond to calls for service and to take general law enforcement calls. So typically the brown stars won't leave their areas unless it's an emergency, which is a priority 1 or 2 call for us. That's the only time they're allowed to leave their township to go to one of the unfunded townships. And this is what it looks like 5 p.m. to 12 a.m. You can see it really drops down to just those townships and a handful of district cars. So this is our watched area for us. These are our north 8 townships, and they're obviously a watched area for us because they have some of the most elevated response times. So these are the priority 1 response times that we look at. You can see my area of focus is kind of in that Nelson, Spencer, Oakfield, Cortland Township, but there's also pockets everywhere in the county where we have extended response times. We already talked about this. Support services. So I want to talk about our 911 call taking center. Over the years, you've heard me talk a lot about this center. We are managing a significant call load for most of the county. 60% of the county calls come through our center. And those calls will include the 911 calls, but they also would include non-emergency calls for service. And pretty much any reason you would call a police department, that's going to come through the 911 center. We expect that we have to answer all of those 911 calls 95% of the time within 15 seconds, which is about a ring and a half. So if you ever think about how quickly you would have to answer the phone to get to this 15 seconds. But 95% of the time, actually 95.27% of the time, we are answering those calls within 15 seconds. Within 40 seconds has to go to 99% of the time. And typically when we'll see the difference are when we're having a surge of calls. A weather event would be a good example. Might be even this time of year we would have storm events that come through, knock down numbers of trees. And in the age of cell phones, we don't get 1 call on something. If you're driving on 131 and there's an accident, very helpful people, maybe 100 very helpful people will call us on that same accident. So that's when we'll start to see some of these calls, call times more extended. And we appreciate every one of them. I don't want anybody to not call because they think somebody else did, but it's something I have to account for in our staffing. So significant budget issues, staffing is always going to be on this list for us because the Sheriff's Department is really made up of people. And if without our resources, we aren't able to do much. We, over the years, had a significant number of general fund FTEs eliminated. We have forced to reduce overtime and scheduling, staggering loss of man hours all combined. We are recovering from that really with these township contracts. We have also, done some work to try to be more strategic about where we're using overtime. I'm pretty happy with where that is right now, and we're heading in a good direction to it, but it's something we constantly have to monitor and lean forward on, and I'm sure you're always going to hear about. We have a significant number of our staff reaching retirement, which could cause shortages on our roster. So I already told you there's a nationwide shortage for corrections officers. We had a bubble that happened 2 years ago in our own correctional facility, and we are through that bubble now. We had 30% of our staff left at that point, 30% because they were all eligible for retirement because they were all hired with a bond issue. We've now replaced all that staff. We are up to staff with correctional facility. I think we still need to go further to reduce overtime in the correctional facility with staff and balance what that looks like. And the same cost, if you hire somebody versus force them to work overtime, it's the same cost to you, but to the person who's working, it's a better life to not be forced to work so much overtime. But our big issue is coming for the law enforcement side. Law enforcement side had a lot of national programs that happened in the 90s where large numbers of people were hired at the sheriff's department, and those staff are now becoming of age, if you will, and time in service to retire, which I'm happy for all of them, and I hope they don't all go, because they're wonderful officers. But as I look at the shortages on the roster that are coming for law enforcement, we look towards the academies, and we find that the academies do not have the capacity to fill the statewide law enforcement positions that are coming open. Because it's not just our department who has the time bubble coming, it's every department in our community. So we have to make sure that we're leaning forward, keeping that competitive edge to recruit for officers, and that we're recruiting officers who have a heart to serve, because that's important to our culture. So we're working really hard on it. We get in front of the academies. We reach out to people very early in their job search, and sometimes in high school, and in some cases in middle school, to start getting them to think about law enforcement. But that's something we're going to have to continue to do to stay on top of it. It's been very difficult to recruit. We talked about that. It takes over 6 months to fully qualify either a corrections officer or a law enforcement officer or a 911 dispatcher to get them fully able to sit in a spot on our roster. This is why we've implemented that temp position approach that's been very cost effective for the county, very effective for staffing for the sheriff's office. A good example of collaboration with the administrator's office and human resource. We're very lucky to have that group of people in play. And I got something going on here and won't go. Okay. Obviously, response time for priority calls. We're going to keep talking about this until we can get it down to what we think is a reasonable response time. I'm not going to go into detail on that again. Training. This is going to continue to be an issue. Every community issue that comes out into the populace, they talk about more training for officers, more training for officers. But just to put it in perspective, an 8-hour training day in a correctional facility environment or in a law enforcement environment typically costs us approaching on $100,000 because of pulling them off patrol, backfilling with overtime, and the number of people that we have in play. It's very, very expensive. And training dollars that are dedicated to this kind of thing are dwindling. We have something called Public Act 302, which provides for law enforcement training dollars. These are a portion of the tickets that are written statewide. It goes through the MCOL's office, and the MCOL's office has taken a larger percent of those dollars every single year to manage the process, which leaves fewer dollars for us to use for training. It also doesn't provide for the staffing cost for training. We also have a pretty similar act for corrections officers that is better funded right now, but still does not actually pay for the training that it requires. That's still money out of our pocket to be able to pay for the training hours that are required, just to keep our staff up to date. And it's important for all of us, not just as a responsibility, but even fiscally, to ensure that our officers receive the proper training, because in the case they don't, we have liability. Opioid epidemic continues to be a pressing problem in our community. I've already talked a little bit about medically assisted treatment for the MAT program, but even our law enforcement entities have huge commitment to try to respond to these types of incidents. I send KNET, which is our narcotics team, to every overdose to try to get to the root cause of what's going on with the overdose, and making sure that if there's information that can help in a law enforcement effort, we're working towards getting that reduced. So it's a heavy lift in our community, and it's going to continue to be so for a number of years. Significant accomplishments. We implemented the power shift, and we've had a 1 and 27-second reduction per call, priority 1 call. We are in the process of implementing a Technical Services Unit. Basically, the technology is very helpful for the Sheriff's Office, and we can save man hours. I'll give you an example. By using a drone on an accident reconstruction, we can save 5 to 6 hours of time on that scene, which often is when we have roads closed, so we can do the investigation. So the drones are helping significantly. We used the drone up north when we had a very large outdoor crime scene that had to be mapped. Can be very time saving. However, I've got to have technical staff to use it. They have to understand how to use it. They have to know that we're using it correctly, because I don't have any room for error. So we are training a special group that are going to practice with this equipment on an ongoing basis so that they are ready to go at a time of need. It's not just the drones. There's like robots that we'll use for our tactical response unit. Might be special equipment that we would use in other crime scenes. We talked a little bit about the Sheriff's app. This is a program that we feel very strongly about. It is already helping us to communicate more directly with the population that we serve, and it's been a great resource. I got to credit Sergeant Roon. I don't know if you ever see Sergeant Roon around. Tell him nice job on this. It was a heavy lift for him, but he's been able to accomplish it. We've implemented a new e-warrant workflow process. This works very closely with the prosecutor's office and the courts. It's been a multiple year process that IT has helped project manage all the way through. Kronos, I think you're hearing a lot about. This is a scheduling software that really makes sure that every dollar we're spending in staffing is capitalized on, and that it's documented correctly, so we're paying people when they're supposed to be paid and not paying people when we're not supposed to be paying them. We have a criminal intelligence analyst unit. I want to talk just for a minute on this. You're going to see a story that's probably going to come out this afternoon. I'll give you an example about this. We have an analyst who basically, they harvest information from different data systems. Maybe there's like a specific kind of thing that keeps showing up in reports, calls that we get called to. And we had an example of this that happened in Michigan, where large equipment like plows, snow plows were being stolen, or maybe it was a tractor, or maybe it was some kind of implement, large things that were not easy to steal, that, started to really occur to this analyst. This has got to be some kind of system in place, because you don't casually think about stealing a tractor and then get away with it, right? It's something that you have to have a plan for. So we started to do a bunch of research. He started to not only find a pattern in our cases, but in cases statewide with other sheriff's department and Michigan State Police. Based on that information, we brought together a group to work on this, and we were very, very successful in finding a criminal enterprise that was victimizing people all throughout our state, frankly, probably beyond our state, and they had a ring of people who were going and stealing, and then they were bringing it back to a location and fencing it out. So we've got a really good, solid case. We worked in conjunction with Detroit PD and Michigan State Police and a couple of other sheriff's departments to bring this to fruition. I'm very proud of our group for this. Flush controls, I know this is going to sound like a silly, significant accomplishment, but we have an estimated annual savings of $165,000 in water usage at the correctional facility, but probably more than that. It saves a lot of staff time, because inmates who have not a lot of things to do and maybe want to interest themselves in messing with the correctional officer or the maintenance staff will flush things down the toilet like sheets or towels, and they continue to flush and flush and flush until it jams up our plumbing. Very expensive for us to fix, pretty noteworthy for the city also. So these flush controls basically minimize the number of times you can flush that toilet, so you can't get it all the way in. And it's really worked pretty well in those areas that we've installed it. So,
Can I get some of those in my place?
yeah, right. We've taken in 1,300 pounds of unused prescriptions at our prescription take-back facilities in the facility. These are just some of our key collaborations. Again, partnerships are what we're built on. We work every day in partnerships throughout the community, and we continue to develop additional partnerships. A look ahead, you're going to see a lot on community outreach with my administration. It's a big, important issue to me. Again, the app's part of that, but continuing to press forward into our community. I think it matters quite a bit. 800 megahertz radio project is in full force right now. All of our towers will be done this year. The infrastructure will be in place by the end of this year. We expect the final functional testing to happen probably in May of 2020, but radios will be installed this year, and everything's going well with that project. Jail management software for improved statistical reporting is hopefully going to be finalized this year. That may have been said in the previous year, but we're hoping it's actually done this time. Strategic plan, we are working very hard on a strategic plan that I expect in draft form to come to you guys probably by the end of this summer. Looking for input, looking for any thoughts from that draft or anything that you think we should consider adding to it. And I'm very excited about the direction we're headed here in the next several years. And that is it.
Well,
Sorry.
You did keep it under an hour and a quarter.
Yeah.
Good for you. So obviously, there's an awful lot here, and I think I've learned that we need to set you for a half a day, not because you talk so much, but because there's so much here, so thank you.
I tried to talk fast, but.
Yes, appreciate that. So, Commissioners, if you have questions, though, I encourage you to keep it down to one or two, because we have some hard stops around the table here that are going to require some of us to leave, and we want to get some votes done here, too. So, yes, Commissioner Poundstein.
Thank you, Chair Steck. So he already cut into my time. So I'll have to get with you later. I had a couple questions ahead of time after reading what you had sent me, but obviously what you said to Dave triggered a lot more. So my first question, this is a call I've gotten in the past. I know I've inquired before. The mounted unit, very effective. I've seen them work not only in our city, but cities across this country. And the question that I keep getting is that I think it's great. It's been funded privately. They built the barn. Is that I don't think it's staffed. And the concern from this call has always been, is what if the unthinkable happens and there's a fire at that barn? What's the outcome for those horses going to be?
So there is monitoring equipment at the barn. So
Okay.
if there were a fire at the barn, we would be responding along with local fire resources for that specific question. But I do feel that there is a staffing need of some sort at that facility. Right now, completely 100% volunteers. I do have the person who is actually responsible for operational management of that lives across the street. So they're close to the facility, but I need probably what I would say is like a caretaker position there. So that's on the agenda to move forward, and hopefully we can partially fund it with the donations that we have. We do have an endowment, a small endowment that would pay part of it. So that's kind of on my long term, but it is monitored. We do check it every single day. There are volunteers that report there every single day to do the feeding and to just check well-being of the horses.
Okay, so my second question will just be a request for more information. On the news, documentaries, human trafficking is front and foremost, and it always ends that this isn't a problem somewhere else, it happens everywhere. Can you get me some information of what you think the effect on Kent County? Do we have a problem, and what are we doing to address that? I'm attending a meeting in a couple weeks on this topic specifically, and if I just had background information of Kent County, that'd be helpful for me.
And I can answer it shortly to begin with. This is actually a national question. I sit on a task force with the FBI where they're trying to figure out how to count these. It's very difficult to count, so I'll tell you that our statistics will not show a problem, but our knowledge says, yeah, there probably is a problem here. And it really has to do with how people identify what has happened to them when they report a crime or don't identify. And often they won't identify because they feel like it puts them at risk. So this is not just a Kent County issue we're grappling with. This is something that everybody's reporting. There's a problem here with reporting. So I can talk more offline with you on that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So then the final one, which is probably a real question, is there's a lot of talk about jail diversion, jail programs, redoing bails, how we send people to and from. What do you think the jail population is going to look like 10, 15, 25 years from now? You know, because all these things have been talked about for a while of changing the way we send people, but, you know, we still have a growing jail populations in this country.
And we don't actually have a growing jail population here in Kent County. We actually have a diminishing, and especially if you look at it per capita, it's diminishing. I think that jail programming, crucial. I think if I can talk about Kent County's jail population, I think you're gonna continue to see a downward pressure on it. However, our community's growing. So the actual number in jail will continue to grow. I think that what we do with the mental health system is gonna have a bigger impact on what happens with jail populations than any other single decision we make as a community, because of the huge correlation between an untreated, mentally ill person and their ability to find themselves in jail, and our inability to fix that issue without mental health services. But for those people who are truly able to make good decisions for themselves and able to be successful outside, but for proper programming, that I think that matters to people. I think you're gonna see bail reform being more customized to the person and the personal risk factors that they might present for being on the outside. I think that's an important change. I talked a little bit about exploring like even tether programming to really push out on who can be released outside of the confines of the jail while still being monitored. I think those are all really good things. If we can keep people employed, working on the outside or doing something for the common good, that's really helpful for that person. It's helpful in every possible way. So I see a lot of those things coming to fruition, but without a nationwide, and specifically statewide, but a nationwide effort for mental health, and then not all jails are created equal, and not every population is being managed in the same way ours is, and they don't stay put. So we're still gonna have all these issues to deal with as Kent County, because there's still a national issue with it.
So Michelle, can I ask you to stick around a
Yeah.
little bit? Because I'd like to suspend the agenda to move to the next two items so we can get a couple of votes in. I know there's lots of questions yet for everything you presented, and then we'll bring you back up and finish that up. Thank you so much. We'll come back to item number 3 then and move to item number 4, which is the appointment of Community Corrections Advisory Board and Fire Commission.
Yes, this is a request to the board to appoint Laura Joyce to the Community Corrections Advisory Board for a 4-year term ending December 31, 2022, and James Morris and Julius Sucky to the Fire Commission for a 2-year term ending December 31, 2020. Midterm vacancies on the Community Advisory Board and Fire Commission recently occurred. Solicitation of applicants to fill these vacancies recently took place for these positions. An interview team of Commissioners Stan Steck, Stan Ponstein, Carol Hennessy was appointed to review applications and interview qualified candidates for the vacancies. The interview team is recommending the appointments of the candidates noted above.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved and supported? And supported. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That is approved. Great. We'll move to item number 5.
This is a request to the Board of Commissioners to add 1 full-time public health educator position and to accept and appropriate $49,000 to the 2018-19 Health Fund budget, and to authorize the board chair designate to execute the grant agreement, approve extensions, amendments, and increases to grant appropriations not to exceed 15% of the original award. The Lakeshore Regional Entity has made a total of $98,000 in funding available to expand the BOTFIN Life Skills Training Program to high school-aged children. The LST program is a highly interactive, skills-based program designed to promote positive health and personal development to help students achieve competency in the skills that have been shown to prevent substance use, violence, and other health risk behaviors. The Health Department is currently piloting the LST program for 9th and 10th graders on a smaller scale. There's currently a waiting list of schools interested in offering the program. The funding will allow for the expansion of the program to offer more sessions at more schools. To support the work required, the expansion of the LST program, one full-time health educator position will be created. The annual cost and salary and benefits for the position is $79,000. The remaining $19,000 in funding will be used to cover the cost of supplies. A total of $98,600 in funding was awarded for the period of June 1, 2019 through September 30th, 2020. The total award was split with $49,000 applied for fiscal year 2019 and $49,000 applied for fiscal year 20. Because the award notice was issued so late in the fiscal year, the unused portion of fiscal year 2019 will be carried over and added to the fiscal year 2020 award. If funding is eliminated or decreased, the positions will be eliminated unless continuation funding is approved pursuant to our fiscal policy on grants, contracts, and donations.
Is there a motion to approve accepting this funding?
So moved.
Support.
Moved, supported. Any further questions? If not, or did you have a question? Okay. If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. Great, thank you. All right, Michelle.
Can I ask more than the three I had?
Well, we'll
On
see.
the second round then?
We'll see. All right, thank you. I apologize for that interruption, and gave you more time to reconsider your presentation. Anything else you want to change while you?
No.
All right. So, any other questions from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Talon.
and
Let's.
Before Stan gets round two.
As long as
he
she's
doesn't.
staying, I said I'll.
So do I get
more.
to ask three also?
You can.
In round one?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Thank you for the comprehensive presentation. That was very helpful and greatly appreciated. Microphone. First question, just kind of crystal ball kind of thing. What's your sense? Well, first of all, can you describe why the federal government doesn't feel it needs to fund health care in the jail? Do you understand that rationale for why that happens? Has something to do with double dipping? Do you know what that is? So we can all understand it?
Well, I don't know that. I wouldn't even pretend to be
Okay.
able to imagine what they're thinking sometimes.
For Medicaid, yeah.
Yeah, but from our perspective, somebody who becomes incarcerated, they're no longer eligible for Medicaid or Medicare dollars as they come in, or Social Security. There's some other things that they kind of get taken back away from them when they come incarcerated. And I guess I've heard it stated that they believe they're getting cared for in the correctional facility, so they don't need that care on the outside. And frankly, that we're paying for it, so they don't have to. So that's, I guess, why they're doing that. But the outcome of that is that there's a lot of lack of continuity in somebody's care of as they come in and out of the correctional facility because they're in a state of crisis, getting them on a system where they're able to receive care and treatment and have it continue and be stabilized. It completely confounds that. So it's something that is a big risk factor. We participate in a number of national groups such as major county sheriffs and large jail network, and this issue is pervasive across the United States. We all deal with the same thing, and frankly, our community deals with it better than most because we have a lot of community focus on mental health, and so there are entities such as Network 180 that kind of step forward and really help us support somebody in that time between, but not even, most communities don't even have that. They release them out the door of the jail and they'll give them whatever the end of their prescription is, and that's it. And they find their way to help or they don't, and typically they're reincarcerated because there's no other alternative, or worse.
Yeah, obviously the outcomes are are really, really bad because of that. It's very unfortunate. If I could just ask one other question, and it's two parts related to data. You mentioned the e-warrant piece, which sounds like it cuts across a number of systems. What's the integration level of the criminal justice data systems? So the prosecutor, the jail, the sheriff's department, the police departments, the courts. Is it a situation where they basically figure out a way to talk to each other, or is it highly integrated, single system? What does that look like?
There are processes that are highly integrated that would cut across multiple entities, courts, prosecutors. This would be a good example of something that is a process that is highly integrated. And this one has to go, from inception, right? The time that there's a case reported to the local law enforcement, that data then pushes to one step to the next step, as the next decision is the prosecutor. The next step is there's a process at the district court where the police feed part of that information to it, the prosecutor's office feeds part of that information to it. And this system keeps all those pieces of information aligned and then historically correct. Once it gets all the way through court, and sometimes it's multiple courts, usually 63rd District Court, then 17th Circuit Court, and then eventually it has to get reported to the state, where we're reporting as a criminal history, but we're also reporting to the state as an active warrant when you talk about our lien system, so anybody can be aware. So there are processes that are that highly integrated like this, and there are processes that are not highly integrated, somewhat paper-oriented. I think completing the integration is really, really important for effectiveness if you're looking at criminal justice effectiveness. Some of the major gaps have to do with things that are a local ordinance violation, like in Grand Rapids. There are many local ordinances that are misdemeanors and are supposed to be reported on somebody's criminal history. But a gap in that process where if somebody's arrested and they're not fingerprinted and printed, and that's submitted to the state, or in a lot of cases even when they are fingerprinted and that's sent to the state because they're lodged at the correctional facility, the city attorney, who is not part of the criminal process system, doesn't submit the fingerprints or the charge decision. So then there's all these orphan records out there. So there's things like that that really need to be looked in the criminal justice data world, and further integration is necessary to make all that come to fruition, because really the bottom line is it's not fair for anybody to either have too much on their criminal history or not enough on their criminal history. It needs to be accurate and complete. That's all there is to it, and there's some steps that we need to do to get to that point so that charging decisions can be made appropriately, release decisions can be made appropriately, programming can be made appropriately.
And a final follow-up related to that. Third strike. We hear a lot about, around the country, around our state, about racialized outcomes in the criminal justice system. And I'm wondering whether our data systems are, number one, able to track that within our system to see what those outcomes are based on race. And part two is whether we actually are doing that. Are we looking at what those outcomes are for our citizens based on race, age, those kinds of things?
I would say, and there's a pretty extensive study that's happening right now, Pew study. I think some of you guys have probably already heard about that, that we are participating pretty heavily in. I would say for the sheriff's office, for Kent County, we have some of the most extensive jail data of anybody in the country. We have for a very long time been very systematic about counting things that matter for decision making. So I think we do have a lot of the data. What you're probably missing, and I sit on the criminal justice policy board for the state now, and we had a very extensive conversation about this. What the gaps in the data that are being collected are really just as important as the data that is being collected. So for example, in Kent County, 17th Circuit Court, circuit court judges, more often than average, are making decisions to send people to jail, or to prison, rather than jail, when they're looking at those straddle cells. So you could go either way. This crime's outcome could be as low as a jail sentence or as high as a prison sentence. Kent County circuit judges are deciding to send them to prison, slightly above average.
Than the rest of the state. Yep.
But why is that? So without the why, knowing that really doesn't do us any good at all. And so if they're doing that, is it because they think there's a specific program there, or has the party been through a number of programs here in Kent County already because we have more local-based programming? And now they're saying, we've given you a lot of chances and we're gonna move you on. So there's a lot of gaps in the data that need to be asked to get to the whys. And I think that's probably what needs to happen next before we as a society can really know what are the root causes of some of these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Melton.
Hi, hon. Thank you, Chair. Very outstanding report. Boy, keep my attention that long is nothing short of miraculous, Michelle. Two things really very quickly, and one is something just the inmate work program. I don't need any answers now, but is there anything documented somewhere where I could learn more about it? Where do the inmates go? What type of work program do they participate in? And I don't need, again, an extensive answer now, but can I find that information from you?
We can get you that information.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a summary document that's readily available. I'm not really coming up with anything, but it would be easy for us to produce one for you.
I'm just, that piqued my interest. And then I know in Kentwood, we don't use the sheriff's department, but our high school does, because it's in Gaines Township.
Right.
And it's always something that going to the football games when I was on school board, et cetera. Over the years, as you've been doing this more and more, and the high school is growing, and of course the demographics is changing, do you find a good work, I'm putting you on the spot and you don't have to answer, but my question is, do you find a good working relationship with the school, with any of the Kentwood Police Department, whatever, and maybe we can talk about that at another time, but.
No, there is a very
Okay.
good working relationship. There's a true partnership that happens with Kentwood School Security, obviously Kentwood PD. We work closely with Kentwood PD on pretty much all assets, and in fact, we do their forensics for any of their crime scenes, and we augment their detective unit as necessary. So I would say that there's a good partnership. I do feel that there is still a need for a school resource officer within Kentwood High School because of just the sheer size and complexity and the social issues that come with a community that large. So that's all those answers.
Okay, and then just a quick note, I'm going on to miscellaneous, but I'll get it all done. We started a grant program and through the Education Foundation in Kentwood of a therapy dog at Crossroads, and I'll be darned if there were not 4 students who increased their grades in a matter of months, got papers in, did whatever, because they were told they could work then with a therapy dog. So with the fact that you mentioned your canines as just comfort, don't ever underestimate the power of that. I cannot wait to see where those kids can soar with someone I consider dogs someone's, and who love them unconditionally. So anyway, thank you.
Commissioner Hennessy.
I'm curious about the intake process for, people, detainees being brought into the jail and the health care assessment, how long people might stay in the holding cells, I think that's what you might call them, and how, if that timing is appropriate, if it's getting longer, or, you've got addictions coming into play, you've got how long it takes to get arraigned, and I'm just curious about that whole process.
I'm going to actually have Under Sheriff DeWitt come out. He's been in charge of our jail for the last several years, and I can talk mostly about your questions, but the actual timelines he's going to be better at, so I'm going to have him come up and talk.
Under Sheriff Chuck DeWitt. Welcome.
Good morning. So like anything, it varies. So whenever you come into the jail, you are first asked a series of questions by your intake staff. They're brought in, and then depending on the timeline, i.e. how many other inmates are stacked, if you will, in front of them, they get fingerprinted, they see the jail nurse, they're asked 2 questionnaires, one having to do with medical, the other having to do with mental health. And once the fingerprints, pictures are taken, then they're moved from intake into the orientation unit. So typically it's within hours, but they cannot move until we get all those check boxes checked, and that depends on the level of cooperation with that inmate. So typically it's hours, but it can extend to a day, but at that point we really start to make concerted effort to gain the cooperation of that inmate, because intake is not the best situation or place to maintain custody of an individual for a long period of time. So I don't have an average for you specifically, but it's typically within hours.
And being arraigned so that you can post bond or, have that option then to move on out?
Sure.
How is that handled?
Yep, so once they are brought into the orientation unit, then depending on when the courts receive the paperwork for the warrant, they will be scheduled for the arraignment. That's typically within 48 hours, but it all depends on when that inmate is actually lodged at the facility. So the clock, for example, typically what you would see is if someone is lodged at, say, 10 p.m. On a Friday, they would typically be set up, well, Friday's not a good example, let's say Wednesday. They would be seen the following morning. However, they could be set for the next day if the court does not receive that paperwork. So it's really dependent upon the arresting agency completing their reports, presenting to the prosecutor issuing that warrant to then be presented to the judge for arraignment.
Actually, I would like to talk about the Fridays and what happens.
Okay. So on Fridays, the arraignments that take place, I'm sorry, there are no arraignments except for at 61st. What takes place are the felonies that are presented as well as domestic cases. So the inmate would come in. If they're arrested for a felony, then the arresting agency would go down to the prosecutor's office. They would present the warrants. The judges would review the cases and they would set a bond. They would not actually be arraigned if they can't post bond until Monday or the next working day, depending on holiday situations. If it's a misdemeanor, then what takes place is there's a probable cause review that the judges will ensure that the officer had sufficient information to make that arrest. The determination is made and either the bond will continue or they'll be released if there is insufficient probable cause. Clear as mud.
It sounds like there are a lot of variables that are in place, and, and if you have someone coming in who has addiction problems or what have you.
Yes, so whether it's an addiction problem or they just happen to be high on drugs or under the influence, that could also play a factor in delaying that arraignment. We have an officer that monitors the behavior, and if they're sensing that that person is not capable of going through the arraignment process, they'll actually inform the judge that that individual is not ready, and they'll delay the arraignment at that point so that inmate can have a clear head and understanding as far as what they're going through.
Are you comfortable that the process in place is meeting the needs and handling things in a timely process?
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like I'm back in my criminal law 101 class. Any other questions? So I have a couple. Michelle, I understand that the state is in the process of mandating that the behavioral health issues, at least in the for the inmates in prisons, be handled by the community mental health agencies. Are you working on that? And if so, what's the strategy to implement that? I mean, Chuck, what's the strategy for implementing that?
So, much like the sheriff said during the presentation, we have a very great relationship with Community Mental Health Network 180. We partner with them. They provide 16 hours of service in the jail, and at-risk inmates are obviously our highest concern. Our intake staff, they evaluate, they ask all the appropriate questions. Our contracted medical staff start the mental health questionnaire. Any red flags that appear by anyone, that inmate is then flagged, and our community mental health come and they visit that inmate. And then depending on the level of severity, there'll be a step-down approach as far as how often they are seen, the types of treatment that they're given, to then move forward with their care while they are maintaining our care and custody. I would say, as far as the jail program is concerned and the inmates that are coming in, we have a very robust program. However, I think as a community, it can be improved upon. I think right now law enforcement is limited with what it is that they can do with someone that is in a mental health crisis. They have to do something with that individual because they just can't leave them out on the streets or in the home. And when a crime has been committed, typically the option is bringing them to jail. There's always that gray area. There's always that officer's discretion. A very good alternative would be to have a crisis center.
Well, imagine that. I'm glad you would mention that issue.
So we are working towards trying to get a crisis center in our community to allow for the officers that alternative as opposed to the jail.
Yeah. Yes, we are. Absolutely. So following up, though, on one of the questions that Commissioner Talon had raised, and my understanding as well is that while the inmates are in the jail, Medicaid will not provide the coverage for their ongoing care. It's actually paid for by the county.
Correct. Or private insurance.
Or private insurance if they have it. And the change that's being looked at, and well, the cost of that, though, is that then contracted by the county to, you pay it out of your?
We pay it as a contract to Network 180 for 16 hours a day service. And they have another grant funded that's diminishing, and I'm not sure how much is left in the grant funded that augments some of the services they provide, but that comes out of the county general fund.
So does the state rule change that at all, or is the state rule only going to impact the prison population?
I think the state rule is aimed at the prison population and not the county.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that the state rule does kind of drill down into the county at some point. I really think fundamentally the most important change all of us can work towards is for that funding for Medicare and Medicaid not to go away when somebody's incarcerated. Because I think if you crack that issue, then all the same resources that pay for those things to happen in the outside community can happen when they're in the inside community. And that will improve the mental health treatment of every inmate across the country.
Yeah, I think most of us would agree with that. And then maintaining that continuity. To make sure that the service providers outside of the system are well aware of the system of care inside the system.
Right, and I think it's so difficult for people to understand how long it takes to get somebody stable on psychotropic drugs and the negative consequences of even a couple day lapse in that program, not just for the actual treatment itself, but the inmate's perspective on whether or not they need treatment. It is very, very difficult. It's a crucial issue that we have to resolve. And those drugs are very expensive, so without that insurance or that service, they're not going to be able to pay for it.
But surely that has implications for a lot of the other issues you talked about, the safety of other inmates, your security issues, your incident issues. All of that's implicated by maintaining that consistency of care.
By far, the most common time that there's going to be a use of force issue with law enforcement or in the correctional facility is going to be when there's an impairment of some sort. Sometimes it's an impairment self-induced, alcohol, or perhaps drugs, but sometimes it's an impairment, the mental health.
Or both.
Or both. Yeah. And that's what we also find coexisting. So absolutely the most crucial thing that as a society we can fix is how we're managing our mental health, people in the community.
Well, and I know that you're well aware of that, and certainly thankful for your continued efforts to work with us in getting that solution, or those solutions. So my last question is, as someone who works on the Lighthouse Servicing Board, I appreciate your comments about that. What is the process by which, since inmates are generally not there that long,
Right.
what's the process to assure the continuity of that educational programming after they're out?
Well, Lighthouse, as you know, has a program where they're able to continue that education when they get out, and most of the instruction's online. It's monitored by somebody who is an instructional coach for the person who is participating in the class, and so they replicate that same approach on the outside, and they have a facility where somebody can go and continue that education. Was one of our original conversation points when Lighthouse approached the sheriff's office and said, we'd like to give diploma services to the jail, because, you know, you don't want to, and a lot of the people that we're dealing with are very young people who absolutely have all the options in the world to get their life very squared away and resume a great person experience in the community. So that diploma makes a difference for that, and that ability, if you're only incarcerated for, let's say, 3 months, and you're able to accumulate certain credits because they work in modules to get credits, then you're able to reconnect and do that on the outside too. It makes a big difference.
But there's really not a way to compel them. Once they're released,
No.
they're outside of your
Nope.
jurisdiction, and they can either participate or not participate.
They can choose not to until the next time they come in, and then
Yeah.
we can re-engage them, but.
Right. Well, something to keep working on.
Yeah.
Good. All right. All right, anything else? If not, thank you so much, Michelle and Chuck, for your presentation. As I said before, we'll have to find a way of doing this maybe in a split presentation that gives us more time to deal with all these issues, so thank you. Next item is miscellaneous. Any miscellaneous? Yes, Commissioner Ponstein.
So these three miscellaneous were triggered by what the sheriff has said. So I think as a legislative committee and our priorities, I mean, that startling fact that Public Act 302 doesn't completely fund, even if they were funding it, there's costs that we have to, just to have training that they're mandating. That's something that our lobbyists need to start working on and looking at, of getting our voice heard. And I'm definitely going to bring that up to the MAC board, because that affects all counties. The drug take-back day, you know, I've heard that the comment with all the opioid settlement that may or may not come. I mean, this shouldn't be a responsibility of the county. Pharmaceuticals have made billions of dollars off these drugs. I mean, it's got to be spearheaded in a way that we can get these off quickly. I don't know if we expand the places or get the pharmacies involved, but that's a cost, and that's something that can effectively get a lot of these drugs out of the wrong hands and being taken just from medicine cabinets. I don't know, maybe if I could get more information of what our program is and maybe do more public awareness of where this can go. I know Oakland counties, they call theirs Operation Medicine Cabinet or something, but I don't know how, if it's just a couple days a year, is there a permanent spot that people can go? I think that would be a good public awareness campaign on our part to get people to places if they have drugs that they want to get rid of. And then finally, we're in a full employment economy. And the remark that we may have trouble finding people to work in the jail, well, that's getting to be true for a lot of professions. Teaching comes to mind, the medical fields. I think what Michelle had said about our competitive edge, I think this is a great county to live in, but I don't know if that's great anymore to enter the field of corrections. I know that never crossed my mind as a profession to do. I know this is complicated, and I know we've looked at it before of what does competitive edge mean? How do we compare to other counties? What are other professions doing to draw people? Because this isn't the first time we've had shortage in certain professions. But I think that's something that this county needs, not just to look at for jail recruitment, but the road patrols and other jobs within the county, IT, management, all of that. It's a highly competitive market. The private sector is offering a lot of money for some of these jobs. So if we can maybe put that on our schedule sometime this year, I know doing a report like that is highly staff intensive, and it takes time to get that all together, but I think that'd be worthwhile, so we're not caught one day saying, when did this happen? At least we've got a little of what the trends are.
Good. Any other miscellaneous? Just one item that I have, and it's actually a follow-up on that issue, and that is a number of commissioners ask what happens to those federal and state priorities that get on the short list. Do they hit the circular file, or is there more life after that? And assuring you that we do continue to have conversations internally about those issues and evaluate when and whether they need to percolate back up to this committee. And would also invite the commissioners, if you have issues, as Commissioner Ponstein raised, to be sure to communicate that to me or to Wayman so that we can get them back on our radar and then follow up to do that analysis. So, all right, with that, I move to item 7, which is an adjournment. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
I am Kent County. I am Kent County.
I am Kent County.
We are 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 Kent County.
Beya, Kent County. Ami, Kent County.
Somos Kent County.
Mas Ira, Kent County.
We are Kent County. We are Kent County. We are Kent County. Oh yeah.